It was an ordinary Friday evening in a small London park. A young woman, as she had done many times before, left her home to meet a friend. Her route passed through the park and usually took no more than 5 minutes. However, this time, things were about to unfold differently. This woman was not a celebrity or a public figure. Her name was Sabina Nessa, and she worked as a teacher at a primary school. Sabina was a simple woman who loved her family and her job. That evening, she just wanted to take a walk in the park and spend time with her friend. But in less than a minute, Sabina's life was cut short by a stranger who brutally and senselessly took her life. This tragedy is not just another case of violence. It's a story about how even in her own neighborhood, a woman cannot feel safe walking through a park on a weekend day. Sabina Nessa was born on September 23, 1993, in England to a family of Albanian immigrants who practiced Islam. However, Sabina herself grew up somewhat detached from her parents' religion and culture. She spent her childhood in Bedfordshire, where she became well acquainted with the British way of life and traditions. Not much is known about Sabina's early years. It is only known that in 2014, she successfully completed her studies at the sociology department, and in 2020, she received a certificate that allowed her to teach in schools. That same year, the young woman took a bold step. She moved to London, where she independently secured a job as a primary school teacher in the southeast part of the city. The school administration highly valued Sabina as an educator, noting her intelligence, kindness, and dedication to her students. The girl's relatives spoke of her as a sensitive, caring, and beautiful person. At 28, Sabina had ambitious plans for the future. She dreamed of working as a teacher in one of the Persian Gulf countries and even shared with her friends her intention to go to Dubai to make this dream a reality. But a cruel fate had other plans. All the girl's plans and dreams were shattered on a night that was no different from many others. On September 17, 2021, at 8:30 in the evening, Sabina left her home on Estelle Road, near Kidbrooke station. She was heading to a bar on Pegler Square in Kidbrooke village to meet a friend. Usually, the journey took a little over 5 minutes, but that evening, Sabina was running a bit late, so she decided to take a shortcut through Cator Park. Although the girl had previously expressed concerns about walking through this park after dark, this time, haste trumped caution. The young teacher walked alone along a dark path, surrounded by trees, ponds, and marshy areas. She was not destined to reach her destination. When Sabina did not show up at the bar, her friend did not make much of it, thinking that she had simply changed her mind about coming. However, throughout the evening, she tried to contact Sabina by phone, but she did not answer. For Sabina, who always quickly responded to calls and messages, such behavior was uncharacteristic. But the friend still did not contact the police. The girl's family also became concerned about the lack of news from her. However, both her parents and sister decided that Sabina had probably just gotten held up somewhere with friends and would definitely let them know soon. Unfortunately, this did not happen. The next day, September 18, around 5:30 in the evening, a grim discovery was made. An elderly man walking his dogs near the community center in Cator Park noticed something strange under a large pile of fallen leaves. Raking through the leaves, he saw a woman's body. The woman had been brutally beaten and was half naked. She was not wearing pants or underwear. The man immediately called the police, who quickly arrived at the scene. An examination of the body showed that the victim had been beaten to death with a blunt object and then strangled. Given the absence of clothing below the waist, investigators suspected that the murder may have been sexually motivated. But it was still too early to draw final conclusions. News of the horrific find quickly spread among local residents, who were shocked and frightened by the brutality of the crime. That same evening, the police reported the arrest of a 38-year-old man on suspicion of involvement in the murder. However, he was later released, although he remained a suspect. Investigators also appealed to the public to provide any information or footage from surveillance cameras that could assist in the investigation. On Monday, September 20th, an autopsy was performed on the body of the deceased at the Greenwich mortuary. Although forensic experts found no evidence of rape, the circumstances under which the body was found still suggested that the murder may have had a sexual undertone. That same day, the identity of the deceased was established. It was Sabina Nessa. The head of the school where the girl worked, Lisa Williams, expressed deep condolences to Sabina's family, noting her professional and personal qualities, and stated that the students would greatly miss their beloved teacher. On September 27, the Metropolitan Police announced the arrest of a second suspect in the case, a 38-year-old man. His identity was not disclosed. Instead, investigators released video footage from surveillance cameras that captured the potential perpetrator on the day of the murder. The footage shows a man standing in Pegler Square with a metal road sign in his hands, looking around. At some point, he pulls a hood over his head and heads towards the park where Sabina's body was later found. Cameras captured that around 8:30 p.m., when Sabina passed by him, the man turned to look at her and then rushed after her. Sabina did not notice that he had started following her from behind. Suddenly, the attacker caught up with the woman and began hitting her on the head with a heavy road sign, which he had apparently brought with him. A few powerful blows, and part of the sign flew off, falling to the ground. In total, experts counted 34 blows, which likely led to a loss of consciousness. After that, the man grabbed Sabina and dragged her into the thicket. Some time later, cameras recorded the attacker returning to the scene of the assault. He collected the fragments of the murder weapon and wiped the bench where he had apparently finished off the victim with napkins. The police urged everyone who recognized the man or had information about him to urgently contact the investigation. A photo of a silver car that the suspect had allegedly used was also released. After several days of carefully studying the video footage, investigators identified the likely killer, but he had left no traces at the crime scene. However, shortly after, the police managed to find footage from another camera showing the man throwing the murder weapon out of a car leaving the park. The license plate of the vehicle helped establish the identity of the owner. It turned out to be 36-year-old Koci Selamaj, an Albanian living illegally in Britain. As it turned out, this was a person with a propensity for violence. Selamaj was born in 1985 in Albania. At the age of 12, he dropped out of school and moved with his family to Greece. His parents did not stay there, but Koci, along with his brother and sisters, remained, hoping to find work. However, a few years later, he had to illegally, hiding in a truck, move to the United Kingdom. In Eastbourne, Selamaj got a job as a handyman and security guard. In November 2018, he married an EU citizen whose name has not been disclosed. This marriage allowed him to legalize his status in the country. However, as the investigation showed, the newlyweds hardly lived together. Selamaj often traveled to his homeland. During 2.5 years of marriage, he visited Albania 6 times. It seems that the marriage was fictitious. British law enforcement officials found out that in his homeland, the man had no criminal record. But his wife admitted that Koci had repeatedly strangled her in fits of aggression. In the summer of 2021, she could not stand it anymore and left him. For Selamaj, this meant serious problems with his legal status in the UK. Meanwhile, the woman got a job at a 5-star hotel, where her ex-husband was staying on September 17. Thanks to the testimony of the ex-wife and video surveillance footage, investigators were able to reconstruct the events of that evening. It was established that Selamaj had flown to London the day before and, despite having housing in Eastbourne, checked into a hotel in his hometown. According to the police, this indicated his plans to find a victim for. A few hours before the murder, he caused a scandal at the hotel over the billing, so the staff called the police. However, the officers who arrived on the call did not detain the guest. Later, Selamaj met his ex-wife in the hotel parking lot and offered her intimacy, but she refused. According to the woman, at that moment, he seemed very agitated and nervous. After the incident with his ex-wife, Selamaj got into his car and drove to London, parking on Pegler Square in Kidbrooke, dozens of kilometers from his own home. Investigators suggest that, having been rejected by his ex-wife, he decided to find another victim. According to the testimony of Selamaj's ex-wife, during their meeting in the hotel parking lot, the man was in a very agitated, confused, and nervous state. After she rejected his offer of intimacy, he got into his car and drove away. At first, his route lay in the direction of Brighton, but later he turned around and headed to southwest London. The final point of his route was Pegler Square in Kidbrooke, where he parked his silver Nissan. This area was quite remote from Selamaj's place of residence. Investigators assumed that, being enraged by the rejection of his ex-wife's harassment, the man went in search of another victim to satisfy his perverse desires. The eyes of street cameras recorded the potential attacker entering a supermarket and buying a rolling pin. He probably considered it as a weapon for the attack. However, something made him change his mind and throw this object away. Eventually, around 8 p.m., Selamaj arrived at Cator Park. For the next 30 minutes, he waited there, looking out for a lonely victim. At that time, Sabina Nessa was finishing her work week. As on many other Friday evenings, she was going to meet a friend. Usually, the girl followed advice on choosing the safest route to the bar. But this time, she was in a hurry and decided to take a shortcut through Cator Park near Pegler Square. It was there that Selamaj noticed her. Making sure that the girl was walking alone, he rushed towards her. The attacker struck his victim a total of 34 blows to the head with a massive road sign, which he had apparently brought with him in the trunk of his car. The force of the blows was such that the metal structure could not withstand it and shattered into pieces. At that point, Sabina had already lost consciousness. However, Selamaj did not stop there. He grabbed the unconscious girl and strangled her. After that, he undressed her and covered the body with fallen leaves, trying to hide the traces of the crime. Having finished with his victim, the killer got into his car and drove to Eastbourne. On the way, near Tunbridge Wells, he stopped on a bridge and threw the murder weapon into the River Tees, hoping to get rid of the evidence forever. After midnight, Selamaj returned to the hotel where he had previously booked a room and went to rest as if nothing had happened. In the morning, he left the hotel just as calmly and went to work at the garage as if nothing had happened. Detectives Neil Jensen, who led the investigation into this brutal murder, drew attention to the stark contrast between the brutal way in which Selamaj dealt with Sabina and his unsuccessful attempt to achieve intimacy with his ex-wife shortly before the crime. For investigators, this was a clear sign that the murder was motive. They understood that they had to catch the dangerous pervert as soon as possible. Just a few days later, on Sunday, September 26, around 3 a.m., special forces burst into Selamaj's apartment in Eastbourne. The man was calmly lying in bed and did not even try to resist during the arrest. During the search, law enforcement officers found his sneakers with blood stains. Examination confirmed that the DNA from these stains completely matched the genetic material of Sabina Nessa. At the police station, investigators began interrogating the suspect. Selamaj remained silent until he was told that he was being accused of murder. Then, through an interpreter, he asked what would happen if he confessed and told them everything. However, since formal charges had already been brought, detectives could no longer ask him questions. On September 30th, Selamaj was brought to the Old Bailey Court in central London. The hearing took place via video link, as the accused was in custody. It was announced in court that, despite numerous blows to the victim's head with a blunt object, forensic experts had not yet established the exact cause of Sabina Nessa's death. On December 16, 2021, during the next hearing, Selamaj refused to plead guilty to intentional murder. At the same time, he agreed that it was his actions that led to the girl's death. The shocking murder of the young teacher did not immediately attract significant media attention. To rectify this situation, concerned journalists began to spread posts on social networks, condemning the lack of coverage of this tragedy by the leading media. Eventually, it worked. The Sabina Nessa case gained publicity and became a reason for public pressure on the authorities with demands to strengthen security measures for women on the streets of London. The head of the school where the deceased worked, Lisa Williams, said that the entire teaching staff was stunned by the horrific murder of their colleague, who had such a promising future ahead of her. She also shared how painfully Sabina's students are experiencing the tragedy. 30 of her pupils simply cannot understand why someone so cruelly took the life of their beloved teacher and why the world can be so cruel. Meanwhile, the investigation was moving towards its logical conclusion. On February 25, the trial of Selamaj began at the Old Bailey. To the surprise of those present, the accused pleaded guilty to the murder of Sabina Nessa. His lawyer noted that the defendant had not provided any explanation for his motives and did not even seem to feel remorse for what he had done. During the first hearing, the forensic expert presented evidence that the victim had suffered at least blunt force trauma to the head and strangulation. Although it was not possible to establish the exact cause of death, each of these injuries could have led to a fatal outcome. The investigation found no evidence of rape. However, according to the prosecution, a number of indirect evidence that Selamaj did not challenge points to the crime. Prosecutor Alison Morgan emphasized that the accused was ready to attack any woman who crossed his path. This was not a spontaneous impulse, the murder was planned in advance and committed with particular cynicism and cruelty. In his closing remarks, the judge characterized this vile attack as a premeditated murder for personal motives. He emphasized that Sabina Nessa had become a random victim of a monster who wanted to satisfy his perverse desires. On April 7, 2022, the sentencing of Selamaj was supposed to take place. However, the convict refused to be present at the hearing, which caused public outrage. The judge called him a coward for such behavior and noted that he did not have the authority to forcibly bring him to the courtroom. During his speech, the judge emphasized that the brutal murder of Sabina only intensified the feeling of insecurity that women experience on the streets, especially at night. He stressed that the victim had every right to walk in the park and enjoy life after a working week without fearing for her own safety. In the end, despite the absence of the accused, the court passed a sentence. Koci Selamaj was sentenced to life imprisonment with the right to parole no earlier than after 36 years. The family of the deceased girl met this news with relief. However, they could not resist calling the killer a vile cowardly beast. Shortly after the announcement of the verdict, Selamaj was transferred from prison to a high-security psychiatric hospital in Broadmoor for an assessment of his sanity. The uncle of the convict, Borda Selamaj, said that he had high hopes for his nephew when he immigrated from Albania. And now the whole family has to bear the burden of shame, financial difficulties, and emotional pain because of his terrible crime. Instead of starting a new life in Britain, he became a brutal killer. Sabina's sister does not hide her outrage at Selamaj's silence. She says that this insult will haunt her until the end of her days, and she will never understand what pushed him to commit such a terrible crime against her sister. Sabina Nessa was an ordinary 28-year-old girl. A teacher who loved her job, family, music, and art. She simply left the house to walk through a familiar park and meet a friend, a usual 5-minute route that she had taken dozens of times. And it was these 5 minutes that became fatal. Some stranger, for no reason at all, just took and brutally cut her life short because he could afford to do it. Sabina is not just another name in the criminal chronicles, not just a faceless victim. This is a life cut short suddenly and senselessly. It is the pain of a family that will not find solace until the end of their days, the fear of women who hear warnings every day like, "Don't walk alone, don't wear short skirts, don't walk in parks at night," as if this is the reason for the violence. The Sabina Nessa case has become a symbol of how fragile the line is between ordinary life and tragedy, how easily a woman can become a victim by a fatal coincidence. We are telling this story not for the sake of hype or views. We are doing it for the memory of Sabina, to demand justice, change, and safety. So that everyone who reads or watches this realizes, it did not happen somewhere else, it happened very close by, it could have happened to anyone. Sabina was supposed to live, rejoice, teach children, meet with her loved one, hug her parents, build a career. But one pervert took all this away from her for the sake of a few minutes of illusory pleasure. And this injustice cannot be changed or corrected. I look forward to hearing your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. Until next time, friends.